The sting didn't come from the laughter, it came from the precision. She had that talent for finding just the right angle, the exact wording to cut through without leaving a visible mark. We were halfway through the mix, so she'd all but dragged me to, surrounded by people whose smiles felt like they were on a timer. I'd been standing there, drink in hand, nodding along to a conversation about nothing in particular when she stepped in beside me. "This is my husband," she told them, tilting her head toward me like she was presenting an exhibit. "He makes bold decisions, like a puppy crossing a busy street." The group laughed. Too loud, too quickly, like they were grateful for something to break the politeness. I forced a smile, enough to signal that I had taken it as a joke, even though every word hit with a precision I couldn't ignore. I felt the silver fountain pen in my pocket, the one she'd given me years ago, suddenly heavier. Strange how an object could feel like it was absorbing the weight of the moment. I stayed in place, listening to the ripples of amusement fade, and she didn't look back at me. Instead, she leaned toward one of them, a man with the kind of smile that comes easily to people who have never been humiliated in public, and said something under her breath that triggered another round of grins. My name didn't come up again, but I stayed aware of her voice in the room, its brightness pitched just high enough to remind me she was still performing. I didn't walk away. I didn't challenge her. That's not how she worked, and it's not how I wanted to play it, and not yet. But I caught the way her eyes flaked over the group, gauging reactions, making sure the laugh landed. She had always been good at this, turning me into a prop in her scene without looking like she meant harm. The pen shifted in my pocket when I slid my hand in, running my thumb along the engraving. Her initials. Mine. It used to feel like something we'd built together. Now it felt like a reminder that she'd been holding the narrative long before tonight. A man beside me asked what I did for work. I answered plainly, nothing embellished, but the way his expression told me she'd already given them a version of me. I wondered how many times she'd done it before, how many small rewrites I'd let pass without question because they were dressed up as humor. I didn't feel anger in that moment, just a kind of stillness. The kind that comes when you realize someone is testing how far they can go in plain sight. And the worst part, I think she knew I'd let her. At least tonight. So I smiled when I should have. Nodded when I needed to. I even laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking she'd hit a nerve. But my hand stayed in my pocket, wrapped around that pin like I was holding onto something no one else in the room could see. It wasn't the joke that stayed with me. It was the way she didn't look back to see if I was laughing too. Like she already knew the answer. Like it didn't matter. Later that week, I asked her about a gap in her evening that didn't make sense. 3 hours between the end of her routine dinner and the time she walked in the door. It wasn't an interrogation, just a simple, "Where'd you go after?" She laughed too quickly, a burst of sound that felt like a reflex rather than amusement. Her eyes darted to her phone before she answered. "Oh, just catching up with friends." The tone was bright, but brittle, like she was layering charm over something she didn't want examined. She went right back to scrolling, her thumb moving in quick, deliberate strokes, her screen angled just far enough away to keep me from catching more than flashes of light. It wasn't until later that night I noticed the pen. The silver fountain pen had been sitting on my desk for weeks, untouched except for when I used it. Now it was on the kitchen counter, uncapped, lying next to a folded grocery receipt that wasn't ours. No grocery bags in sight. No explanation for why it had moved. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers, the weight familiar. The cap clicked softly as I secured it again, and I asked, as casually as I could, "Did you use my pen today?" She didn't look up from the laptop. Oh yeah, I think so. No details. No reason. Just the kind of vague confirmation that feels more like a dismissal. Her attention was still fixed on the glow of her screen, and I realized she hadn't actually registered the question, only that I'd asked one. The rest of the evening carried that same strange current. She laughed at something on her phone, then caught me watching and set it down with exaggerated casualness. When she went to make tea, she left the phone on the counter, but face down. I'd seen her do that more often lately. I told myself not to overthink it. That's what she'd want me second-guessing my own read of the moment. But the image of the pen on the counter stayed with me. It wasn't about the object. It was about how things had started shifting in small, almost invisible ways she could always write off as coincidence if I pushed. That night, lying in bed, I noticed she turned toward the wall instead of me. I stayed still, listening to the soft tap of her phone as she typed something in the dark. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't ask why. Because the thing about small changes is that they rarely stay small. And when they start stacking up, they don't disappear, they form a pattern. And I was starting to see the shape of it. At lunch a few days later, the first real crack showed. We were with a small group, 2 couples we'd known for years, and one of her newer friends, a man who seemed to exist mostly in her stories about work. The conversation drifted, harmless enough, until one of them smirked at her and said, "Hope you didn't get lost last Thursday." It was quick, almost tossed away, but I caught the moment it landed. She froze for just a fraction of a second, the kind of pause people don't hear unless they are listening for it. Then she laughed too lightly and shook her head. "Traffic was a nightmare," she said, like that explained everything. I kept my smile thin. My hand found the silver fountain pen in my pocket, twisting it slowly, the metal cool against my skin. It wasn't an intentional gesture, it was reflex. I felt the weight of that pause more than the words themselves. The table moved uneasily enough. She steered the conversation toward vacation plans, dropping the names of resorts like confetti. But every time my eyes met hers, there was a flicker quick, gone before anyone else could notice. A check-in. A calculation. When the server brought our drinks, she reached for hers without looking at me. Her fingers brushed the condensation off the glass, nails painted a color she hadn't worn in years, deep red, the kind she used to say chipped too easily to bother with. I wondered who she was wearing it for now. I didn't say a word during the lull between topics. Just traced the engraving on the pen, her initials, mine feeling how the letters caught slightly under my thumb. She glanced at me once, almost in warning, before turning back to her new friend and asking about a project they were finally wrapping up. The rest of lunch felt rehearsed. She laughed at the right moments, offered small touches on the arm to the people she wanted to charm, and left the bill half paid on the table, insisting she'd get the next one. But the slip had already happened. Driving home, she filled the air with talk about a potential weekend trip. I nodded in the right places, but my mind stayed back at that table, replaying the moment she froze. Not because it proved anything, not yet, but because I could see how quickly she recovered. How practiced it was. It was the kind of recovery you don't learn overnight. Though nothing ended the night, I checked the old security app. We'd both forgotten it was still active, at least she had. The newer system synced to her phone, but the backup feed was still quietly uploading to a cloud account tied to mine. I hadn't looked at it in months. That night, I opened it without a plan, just a restless instinct that wouldn't shut off. The clip was only 14 seconds. She came into frame from the side gate, not the front door, moving quickly but not hurried. A jacket draped over one arm, her phone in the other. She glanced over her shoulder once and smiled at someone just out of view. Whoever it was didn't follow her in. She shut the gate softly, like she'd done it before, and disappeared inside. A timestamp read 1:12 a.m. That same night, she told me she got home just before midnight. I remembered because she'd said it while kicking off her shoes, voice breezy, already scrolling her phone. I watched the clip twice more, each time noticing new details. The way her hair was slightly tousled, but her makeup still neat. The faint shift in her expression as she reached for the door, how the smile lingered a second longer than it should have. The next morning, the silver fountain pen was on my nightstand, uncapped. I knew I hadn't used it. The ink cartridge was half empty, which meant someone had. I turned it slowly in my fingers, the metal catching the thin stripe of sunlight coming through the blinds. She came into the room with her coffee, saw me holding it, and said, "Oh, I was just signing something last night." No mention of what. No offer to explain. She set her cup down, kissed the top of my head like we were still on some quiet domestic scene, and left before I could respond. I didn't follow. Instead, I opened my laptop and downloaded the clip to a private folder. I labeled it with the date and time, then closed everything down before she could wander back in. It wasn't proof of anything final, not yet. But it was the first thing that couldn't be explained away with a laugh or a quick change of subject. It was a piece of the pattern I could hold in my hand. And now that I had it, I knew I wouldn't be letting go. Digging deeper into the cloud archives was never part of my nightly routine, but once I opened that door, I couldn't shut it. Most of the recent files were harmless grocery receipts, warranty PDF, the kind of digital clutter that piles up without notice. But buried in a folder marked travel, I found something different, screenshots of messages. Not to me, not even to someone she'd mentioned before. 2 names I didn't recognize. One I knew immediately too well. Each thread had the same tone, the same carelessness. My name appeared in them like an obstacle, not a person. He's still in the way. He wouldn't understand. I'll figure it out when the timing's right. The messages weren't elaborate. They didn't need to be. A single laughing emoji next to a jab about me did the job. The worst wasn't the words, it was how casually they were sent. No hesitation. No sense that what she was doing required even a shred of discretion. I sat there in the glow of the screen, the silver fountain pen resting on the desk beside the trackpad. The engraving caught the light, her initials and mine, side by side. They used to feel permanent. That night, they looked like a warning etched into metal, something sharp enough to cut if you held it too long. Her voice carried from the living room, low and conversational. A call not to me. I could only hear her half of it, but the rhythm was familiar, those small, deliberate pauses she used when she wanted the other person to feel like they were being let in on something. She laughed once, not loudly, but in a way that didn't sound like the woman I'd married. When she hung up, she called out, "Do you need anything?" I said no, my voice steady, even. She didn't step into the room. I copied every file to an encrypted drive and ejected it, slipping it into the back of the desk drawer where the pen usually stayed. Tonight, the pen stayed with me. I capped it tightly, slid it into my pocket, and left the desk light on. Patterns don't always reveal themselves in grand gestures. Sometimes they're just a series of small, deliberate moves that add up to something you can't ignore. And now, the pattern was impossible to unsee. Breakfast felt staged before a word was spoken. She set a mug in front of me with 2 hands and sat opposite, shoulders squared like she'd practiced. The silver fountain pen lay beside her plate, my pen lined up with the edge like a cue. "I might be expecting," she said. No preamble. Just the sentence placed between us like a centerpiece. We hadn't been close in months. Calendars don't misremember. My mind still did the math. 12 a.m. at the side gate, the threads in the travel folder, my name used like a speed bump. Her face looked pale in a deliberate way, less mascara, hair pulled looser, the sort of undone that takes planning. Her fingers tightened around the mug. No ring today, she'd have forgotten it twice last week. She glanced at her phone, face down, then slid it farther away as if to prove restraint. "It's early," she added, stirring tea that didn't need stirring. I just felt off. "How far along do you think?" I kept my voice even. The spoon tapped the rim twice before she answered. "Hard to say. Stress, maybe. I haven't tested yet." And her eyes flicked to the pen and to the small pharmacy bag she'd half hidden under a napkin. Prenatal vitamins peeked through the paper like a headline. I turned the bag so the receipt faced up. The timestamp didn't care about theater, 11:54 p.m., the same night she'd crashed early. She smoothed the paper flat and said, "Lighter now, it could still be nothing." Nothing had been working overtime in our house. "We should get a proper test," I said. Simple. Practical. She smiled without teeth. "Maybe we wait a week? No need to make this a thing if it's just my cycle being weird." But then the pivot. "Also, we should talk. You've been distant. It affects these things." The attempted shift slid across the table, neat as a brochure. I let the silence breathe. The pen's engraving caught a thin band of light, her initials. Mine, a logo for a business that didn't exist anymore. "I'll book something today," I said. "Clinic, blood work." She swallowed. "I mean tests at home are accurate." Her tone stayed airy, but her hands betrayed her thumb rubbing the mug, a shallow, repetitive arc. Why escalate? Because the pattern was complete. The clip, the threads, the gate, the receipt, the vitamins placed on cue. If true, the timeline broke. If not, she was using a story to steer us back under her control. I finished my coffee and watched her study my face for cracks. Behind her, on the counter, the health app tile was missing from her home screen, removed, not deleted. Reversible. She reached for the pen, rolling it once like she could write us back into simpler days. "Are you mad?" she asked, eyes glossy but dry. "No," I said. "I'm clear." I straightened the pen so the engraving faced me, photographed the receipt and the vitamins, and filed the images with the gate clip. Evidence doesn't shout. It waits. She exhaled. "So you'll handle the appointment?" "I already started," I said. Her calendar showed a client call, 10:30, but when she turned the screen I caught the original title ghosting beneath the edit, "Clinic Consult." The letters flickered like a watermark and vanished. She noticed I had seen it and tried on a softer smile. "Everything will be fine." That was when hope retired. Not in flames, just quiet. I slid the pen into my pocket, heavier than metal, and rinsed my cup. Behind me, her spoon traced circles that went nowhere, choreography for an audience that had stopped clapping. I chose a weekday afternoon when the cafe would be busy enough to swallow noise. She loved this place, the posters, the soft bulbs, the barista who knew her order. I took the corner table by the door and laid out the stack, stills from the side gate, message screenshots with timestamps, and the clinic's blood worker crest. On top, the silver fountain pen, aligned like a metronome. She arrived in sunglasses she didn't need and a smile built for reflections. It held, then hesitated. "You beat me," she said, sliding into the chair. Her bag stayed on. I nudged the folder forward. No speech. Just paper. Her fingers hovered over the pen, then withdrew as if ink could bruise. "What is this?" she asked, reaching for the menu but not opening it. "The quiet part," I said. She glanced at the first page, her at the gate, smile suspended. A millimeter of jaw tightened. "You dug through old files," she tried. I checked backups. She slid to the next sheet, the thread where my name was an obstacle marker. Recognition flickered. She exhaled and set that page aside like a receipt. "This is out of context," she said. The smile didn't reach anything. "Your reading tone, people misread." I tapped the clinic requisition with the pen cap. "This part isn't tone." Her gaze dropped to the letterhead. Her hand found the wrist where the ring wasn't. "I told you I felt off," she said, softer. "I didn't want to worry you." A server set down waters, her eyes paused a beat on the paper before moving away. "I booked blood work," I said. "They'll text you a code." I showed the confirmation, then set my phone face down between us as witness. "We could have talked at home," she said. "This feels performative." "You prefer audiences when the lines are yours," I said. "Today the room can hold the silence." She lifted the pen, tested its weight, set it down. I watched her pick and discard strategies behind her eyes. She landed on concern. "You've been distant," she said. "Stress makes people imagine things." "I love you," she said next, careful. "I wouldn't hide the truth from you. If I've seen different, it's because I felt unwell. Then the test will make it simple." She nodded, then reached for the screenshots again. "People vent," she said. Her thumb hovered over a line. "He won't do anything, he's too gentle." She covered it with the page. "Can we keep this between us?" "This isn't a scene," I said. "It's a record." The cafe returned to small sounds, silver on ceramic. A grinder, a child asking for sugar. She folded the page in half and unfolded it, reflex for control. "What do you want?" she asked. "Clarity and your signature." I slid the lab form forward, the pen on the line. She didn't touch it. If I sign, will you stop digging? I'm done digging, I said. I'm filing. She looked past me to the window. When she looked back, something had dimmed a calculation running out of road. She picked up the pen, the nib scratched once. The sound was final. She pressed the form flat. Happy? She asked, voice steady, eyes bright in a way that wasn't tears. I am finished. We sat with the space between us measured in paper and water rings. She capped the pen and slid it back. I left it where it lay. When she stood, the chair barely touched tile. I'll text you the code, she said, and walked out. I gathered the pages, the pen on top, and watched her reflection leave the window a second before she did. The door chimed. Evidence doesn't beg. It waits to be read. Weeks later, the updates didn't come from her, they came sideways. A mutual contact mentioned, in the same breath as a weta comment, that the man from the gate footage was out of the picture. No explanation. The second name from those threads had stopped appearing on her feed. The third had blocked her outright. It was a collapse without ceremony. Her online life shifted overnight. Brunch tables became quotes about growth in muted fonts. Selfies vanish, replaced by stock sunsets and captions no one liked. The audience she counted on had thinned, and the silence under each post was louder than any comment could be. The silver fountain pen sat on my desk now, not in my pocket. I used it to sign the last separation document I cleaned a vision of what we once called shared. The form had my initials and hers in tight proximity, though the ink was mine alone. I capped the pen, weighed it in my palm, and decided it didn't belong here anymore. That afternoon, I drove to her place. No call ahead. No note inside. Just a pen on the doorstep, balanced atop the envelope. The paper inside carried the signature and the date, nothing else. No message to frame the ending. As I turned to leave, I noticed the blind shift just enough to catch a glimpse of her face. Not shock, not anger. Something quieter. The look of someone who realized the story had moved on without her. Walking back to the car, I felt no urge to check if she picked it up. No temptation to watch for a reaction. Whatever meaning the pen once held was hers to invent now. Mine had run out the moment I saw my name in those threads, like it was an obstacle to work around. Driving away, I caught my own reflection in the rear view. No smile. No weight lifted. Just a steady calm, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to hold on to. She could keep the pen. I'd kept the clarity.